Friday off. Yeah, we thought I thought.
They didn't
we
have the mic.
Didn't have the mics.
We gotta get the mic set up.
Next time.
It's all Mr. Root's fault.
That's okay, we're gonna pat you on the back for some of those nice sentences that did what we asked you to do. And, yeah. We like that, keep it simple.
There's a sign sheet right there if you want to sign it off at all.
I wasn't gonna say that out loud.
Mr. Chapman, are you ready? Mr. Root, are you ready? All right. All right. Welcome, everyone, to tonight's Planning Commission. I'd like to call to order. If we could have the invocation, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Father, thank you for this day that you've created and creating us. Together, blessings and wisdom over this commission. Help to us, the staff, to give guidance and wise decisions, thoughtful decisions about.
Thank you. Do we have a list of concerns? Thank you. Mr. Mike Smith.
Big book here. Can I move this? I hope I can offset. Is this yours? Is this everything you know?
Yeah, it's everything.
This is everything you know, right there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My standard disclaimer still applies. These comments are mine as a private citizen, and there is no input from any other group or agency. First, I'd like to take the time to welcome Bill and Adam to the Planning Department. I know the handoff with Greg was very short, and they should be up to speed very shortly. I hope the Commission will accept their recommendations with an open mind. They see the planning problems more frequently and know if an ordinance needs revision and can make the best revision proposal. They are the professional planners with expertise, and the Commission should depend on them for accurate, unbiased guidance. My other topic is item 8 on the agenda, removal of method 2 rezoning. Time prevents me from reviewing the history of why the county adopted this method. Suffice it to say it works, and eliminating it will create more problems than it solves. Rereading the minutes from previous meetings, this suggestion was made because the Casto project was less than 200 acres and the rumor of another development nearby that is less than 200 acres. A company such as Casto buys property for a development knowing full and well the speed bumps or wickets they will have to go through to complete their project. They know whether or not these problems can be overcome without undue delay unanticipated expenses, and possible lengthy litigation. They are used to this type of initial activity and are staffed to deal with these issues. If a variance is needed during development, that is a function of the BZA. And yes, I have been to recent BZA meetings. They are designed to deal with these types of issues. Just because a development is less than 200 acres does not mean you have to eliminate method 2. The alternative solution is method 3, which is just as efficient as method 2. Method 3, sometimes known as top-down zoning, allows the county council to, and I'm quoting from the method 3 process, quote, rezone any parcel or group of parcels to bring them into compliance with the goals established in the Oconee County Comprehensive Plan. This is a quote from the comprehensive plan. Utilize the county-wide zoning process to plan appropriate development and protect special areas through rezoning and overlays. In addition, eliminating method 2 may burden the county council with numerous rezoning requests that aren't compatible with good land use management. It may, in some cases, pit neighbor against neighbor if some parcel is rezoned that decreases one's property value or creates an unwanted activity close by. The overarching concern is we will then allow pinhole type rezoning, which is not what zoning was designed to accomplish. In short, people buy property knowing what can or cannot occur next to them or close to them. To repeat, eliminating method 2 will create more problems than it solves. Time precludes me from commenting about agenda item 7. My question about item 7 is that if the setbacks are moved to subdivisions in Chapter 32, do they still apply to control-free districts not in a subdivision? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cotner?
Mr. Chairman, members of council, commission, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk with you. My name is Jim Codner, and I represent the views of Advocates for Quality Development. We represent about 7,000 property owners around the lake, but we're interested in development throughout the county. I'd like to speak a little bit about the 200-acre requirement in the small area method. Back when the ZEO was being written, planning department knew that, hey, there's a lot of interest out there. There's going to be a lot of people who are interested in being rezoned into whatever district. A lot of it was residential interest, but a lot of other folks wanted other kinds of zoning. And they knew if they didn't do something, you're going to have chaos with a bunch of individuals coming in and saying, hey, I want to be zoned. So they said, what we really need to do is get a reasonable mass of people together and know that there's interest out there. So they said, let's set, and they just picked 200 acres. Let's set 200 acres as kind of a minimum size area that we want to consider. Zoning is an area-wide kind of activity. It's not associated with individual, it's done by individual parcel, but it's not so much about an individual parcel as is about development in an area. So let's get a reasonably sized area, call it 200 acres, and let's say we want to make sure that there's enough interest in that, in zoning in that area to warrant the time and effort by council and administration, planning department, planning commission, whatnot. So let's make a requirement of 51% of the owners of those parcels need to sign a petition to ask council to rezone. And so that's how it all came about. And it really worked very well. It worked very well. Yes, there were arguments back and forth and lots of different opinions and some dust-ups, but in general, it worked well. Areas that were interested made their application, council considered them, and finally enacted a zoning ordinance. More recently, if you look at what happened in the southern end of the county with the agricultural rezoning, there we had several hundred parcels comprising thousands of acres where people wanted to be rezoned agriculturally. And that worked well. Think about what would have happened if those people had wanted to be rezoned agriculturally and they had to deal with it individually. Every farm owner would have had to come in, make application to county, go through a three readings, a public hearing. You guys would have to be involved on each individual request. Instead, they had one request. And that's the logical way to handle it. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Sewell?
I'm Debbie Sewell, and I'm speaking tonight as a private citizen. I am an advocate for agriculture and the natural resources here in the county. I grew up here, I'm a native, and I just seen it not change a lot. But there are two things that concern me. One is what these fellows have been talking about, the 200 acre, the small area rezoning. I think that it needs to stay the same. I don't think that that needs to be reduced at all, and I think it would be have a negative impact, especially on agricultural and natural resource areas. The other part with the changing the setback requirements from the control-free zone, for the same reasons, I think those need to stay the same also. That's all I have.
Thank you. There's nobody else signed up. Is there anyone that would like to speak? Okay, thank you. Moving on. Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess after last month, we so go back to the approval of minutes. First, we have from June 19th, 2017. We have a motion?
I had a couple of grammatical things that I'm not sure, Mr. Chapman was fairly sure that I had included him on what I had sent him before, but I would make a motion that they be approved as amended, and I'll just hand him this list so he can check against it.
We have a second? All in favor? Aye. Minutes from July 3rd, 2017.
Motion to approve.
It says members present. I was not at that meeting, and it has me listed.
Correct, and I know that that's been noted on there as well. We have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Thank you, Mr. Root. Staff updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The commission had expressed some interest in having an update on a regular basis about projects and issues that are coming along that may have already come through our office or had been mentioned already, or perhaps have been submitted to us for review, and that you would like to be aware of those if they are of some substance. And we thought we'd bring you tonight just a brief update. This doesn't include a lot of data. In the future, if you'd like more information about specific projects as we go along, we'd be glad to do that. This is more of a very cursory, very brief summary. And it refers to, if you're looking at the screen or at your packet, 36 zoning and flood review permits issued. This is over a 2-week period, I believe. That's new construction, mobile homes, decks, additions, pools, sheds, that sort of thing. So that's everything. One sign permit, that's for the new Dollar General, Ebenezer. Actually includes 2 signs, but it's under one permitting process. And then Harbor Point Phase 2 has come in for, that's a preliminary submittal that's just come in. We've actually had a revision to that preliminary. It had been submitted previously, and the revision is back in for review, so we should have a conclusion on that here in the next few days. That's the Phase 2 is a 71 parcel portion. I think the total parcels for Harbor Point 1 and 2 are about 150. And of course, as you may remember, Harbor Point 1 had already been approved at the preliminary level. So that's kind of where we are for the moment. And if you do have other specifics you'd like us to discuss, please just feel free to ask.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chapman?
Hey, good evening. My name is Adam Chapman, planner for Oconee County. And in some meetings past with previous staff, a corridor project for 123 was asked for. Bill and I are trying to get you a good product, and so we just have some questions. So this is kind of just a baseline establishing what we have, what we know, and some of the things that we don't know. And what we're really kind of looking for is some directive as to like a final deliverable that we can bring to you as soon as possible. So we're going to go over tonight the current conditions, strengths and weaknesses, Lancaster County corridor, and some of the next steps. Right now, this is just 123, going from, it's about 4.66 miles from the bridge in Clemson to Seneca. There's 25 intersecting roads, and it takes about 10 minutes, depending on time of day, traffic, and football games. Those green dots that you see up on the screen there, those are places where South Carolina Department of Transportation has placed trip counters. That's their traffic control to see how many cars are going over it. So the next slide is traffic. That has been addressed by the council and this commission about traffic mitigation. So the blue is 2012 traffic counts, red is 2013, green is 2015. As you can see on 123, which are the first two big bars, there's quite a bit of trips. Those are average annual daily trips. That's across the entire year. Today there may not be 25,000 trips at the bridge, but maybe during school or other times there are. So there's definitely, it's showing, even though it's 3 years, it's showing some growth in the area. So traffic mitigation is something to think about. You've seen maps for the previous map for the growth corridor. I kind of fine-grained it down to the parcel level. There's 131 adjacent parcels on the area that will be affected by anything that we put forth. And I think that's just an important number to note, that there are 131 adjacent parcels, either vacant, in construction, or otherwise occupied. There are some strengths and weaknesses of the corridor. It's already an entryway. There's significant growth happening. It's an important link. Castle and Epic are both strengths for the corridor. Weakness, significant growth is already happening. So we're kind of behind the 8 ball in creating a plan. There's existing buildings, topography, the size of the parcels, existing code sections, and SCDOT ownership of the right-of-way. So this is the topography. It's kind of a hot mess of a map, but the individual lines represent 20 feet of elevation. So just kind of showing that there are elevation issues when we're thinking about any plans we make, any things that we overlay on top of it that we're going to add, have to take in the current conditions. So this is kind of a close-up, that you can see that there's over 100 feet of elevation gain on some of these parcels. And I just want to kind of bring it to the attention that these are important metrics when factoring in the size of some of these parcels of topography if we require certain issues in the overlay. Now going on to the corridor study, Lancaster County was noted as being something that we want to look towards, something that we want to really kind of beat, or at least kind of use as a template. The corridor study is 151 pages plus 86 pages of economic development study done by Kimley Horn. They're a pretty well-known planning build corporation. It took about 2 years to do the study. That, by 2014, became a 30-page corridor ordinance. So basically it took them 6 years to come up with their ordinance. And I'm just using that to put in perspective as to what we're trying to create. So this is the end study. You know, kind of feels about like 15, 20 grand or so. And 6 years of work by a lot of different people. A lot of private and public energy went into the corridor study. And I'm just kind of pointing that out to try to ask the next question is, the Oconee County wanted some other options. The letter they sent you on April 24th that I got, as far as the corridor is concerned, these are some items that they wanted on their list. Anything from traffic mitigation, signage, lighting, pedestrian friendly, street trees, impervious surfaces, as well as reaching out to Clemson University for their expertise. I think Clemson's expertise would really work well for a study if that's the way we wanted to go, because they're an institution that does that kind of thing. And your last meeting, at least the meeting about the corridors on June 19th, bike lanes, native species, and traffic mitigation were all mentioned as things that you all would like to see in the corridor. So the question is, from staff to here, is that what can we create for you? What's our end deliverable? That's really what we'd like to, if possible, walk away with is, are we creating a study? Are we creating policy similar to Destination Oconee, where it's it's a good quality policy to have, but maybe it's not 100% ingrained in the code, or are we looking to finally deliver ordinances? So those are some questions that staff has for this board, and that's all I have to show tonight.
I think it's rather unanimous. We wouldn't be sitting here if we thought we had time for a study. So, and I think knowing I mean, I can speak just from listening to comments across the county. I don't know that we need policy because they spend a lot of money on Destination Oconee, and it's still evenly divided, yes or no. But it's doing nothing to get us towards a more successful destination as a tourism site. So my personal feeling is that we need to create an ordinance if we're going to make a corridor and actually do something about the traffic and issues that are growing on 123.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
We've been talking a lot about a number of different things between Adam, Bill, and I, but this is one issue that we've just been dancing too fast to get up to speed with one another on. My recollection, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, was that y'all did direct Greg to essentially bring into concert the two exemplars he had. One was Lancaster, and I don't know what the other one was, and put those forward, put those into an ordinance type document, like a template for y'all to consider. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes.
We even had a motion to that effect. So
Yes.
we hadn't talked about that, so they're blind to that issue. They weren't here at that point, but yeah, they want the ordinance.
I didn't watch that far back.
Well, I would just like to commend the both of you on how fast you've been able to put this together
They've been working
and the quality of it. Not anything against past staff, but I'm just very, very impressed. Thank you very much.
That was what I took from council, just was listening and being at the meetings, that they wanted an actual ordinance rather than trying to do studies and all this, because we didn't have time for all that. We needed to do something as soon as possible to get it, the traffic and for a safety standpoint was the big thing. And I think the ordinance is the way to go.
It was something that we could not only ask 123, but it would have some generic qualities that would apply to other areas. Right.
I might, Mr. Chairman, I'll just sense of this. I did have a general sense that ordinance was where you wanted to go. I guess our only concern was, if it is a concern, it's more of a question, is how applicable that particular document, for example, is to our situation. And some things are. There's a lot of focus in that particular ordinance, the Lancaster one, on things like landscaping, streetscaping, lighting. Don't remember, Adam, whether they did much with frontage roads, but that's a tough animal to deal with, frontage road issues. The other issues would be things like requiring rear parking in the rear of the buildings, things like that. That was a focus of the way the Lancaster ordinance kind of played out, which appeared to be mostly aesthetic in nature. I may be wrong about that, but I'm not sure there's a lot there that really grasp hold of the issue of how can you get control of traffic impacts, access issues. I'm not sure, Adam may have read it a little bit more closely than I did. But I just bring that up as a matter, just a point of reference that, I think traffic was certainly considered to be an important factor in all this. I don't know how significant these kinds of improvements, which while they are interesting and have a lot of improvement in terms of aesthetic quality of the built environment, I'm just not sure about the transportation side of it yet. We can certainly, just kind of work with this ordinance and see that we address those things for you.
I know one of the things that I talked with several people about it is that one of the things we've already gotten behind on is the number of driveways, which I think would be a major controlling thing for traffic control. If you say there can only be a driveway every so many feet, then you're automatically saying there's gotta be a frontage road in there, so perhaps if you could start from that point, is that possible? To look at the parcels that are left, obviously, if you've already got a whole row of houses, you can't limit their access, but particularly on commercial properties or properties that are more likely to become commercial, can you limit the number of driveways to X per feet, and then say, from that, then obviously if you're gonna access a mall, you're gonna have to have a frontage road or a larger parking area, and then address it from that direction?
You could
Does that make
do
sense?
a certain number of access points per the amount of frontage that you have. For example, let's say you had 1,000 feet of frontage, you might be allowed to have more curb cuts than
Right.
if you had 200 feet of frontage. And then you also would have whatever the state standard is in terms of, providing access points on the state right-of-way. So, and we could have a more stringent requirement in the state if that's what you and council chose to have.
I know that there's like already 3 driveways that weren't there when we started this conversation, between the stoplight at the Food Line and the bottom of the hill at the 4-wheel drive
Yeah.
place, so, obviously that's, stuff is going quickly. So whatever y'all can do quickly.
Any other comments?
Yeah, we keep talking about 123. You say there's 131 parcels. I'd be curious, of those 131 parcels, how many of those are developed and how many are undeveloped? We keep going back to 123. To me, the cow's out of the barn, or, I think it might be too late for 123. So, whereas 59, 11, these other corridors that were brought up, not that we shouldn't focus on 123, but I imagine of those 131 parcels, there's not too many that are left that are not developed. How much time, we can spend all the time in the world on 123, but we're not solving the bigger problem. So I think we ought to focus, if we're going to go down the corridor road, I think we still could have an impact on 59 and 11 and some of the other corridors that were brought up, whereas I think 123 is 123.
To continue that conversation, coming back 2 or 3 steps, we kind of started this conversation a year and a half ago because of the comprehensive plan. In that comprehensive plan, we called something rustic elegance. Whether it's called rustic elegance, whether it's called something else, that was the big picture that was coming in because of a tourism element with the comprehensive plan. Trying to say, let's make sure that our gateways are starting to have some sort of consistency with them within the commercial element. I do think that it would be important to see what's developed versus what's not developed when we're looking at 123. I don't know that we have the ability at this point, at least within 123, to go down to whether it be bike lanes or road frontage or frontage roads or other issues. What I do think that we need to do, identify the commercial elements that may be applicable, start defining whatever that definition is, call it rustic elegance, call it something else. If we are going to have a corridor plan based on the comprehensive plan, I think that we need to come at it with that big picture rather than just narrowing down and saying, okay, are we going to allow 2 driveways or 3 driveways off of here? I think we need to start coming up with what that big picture looks like and then see how anything else is going to fit in there from a state safety standpoint or DOT standpoint.
I agree with what's been said so far, but I do remember council specifically asking for the safety traffic-wise and the curb cuts on any road that we decide to do a corridor on. It should be one big focus because we don't want 1,000 feet of road frontage to have 10 or 15 different curb cuts in it where everybody's wanting to stop, and then you get rear-ended and you have a lot more accidents. We do need to come up with some kind of footage, whether it be 300 foot or whatever, to say you can't have them but every 300 feet, regardless if you've got 1,000 or 2,000 road frontage. And the safety of our pedestrians and our county people should be at the top of everything, traffic-wise, the walking pedestrians, all of our unfortunate drivers now riding mopeds, and bicyclists. We have a tremendous amount of bicyclists in this county, and we need to do something to make sure they're safe on the highways, at least the ones we can control anyway. So those are three main things, or several main things that I think we need to consider. And I agree with the 123. It's pretty much done. I mean, there's a few little things there that we maybe could do to cut down on some of the new building that we've got in that area that can be done. But whatever we do for this 123 corridor, we need to make sure it will sort of fall into 59. Once they finish with the sewer, the water, and all that out on 59 and get the industrial park out there, 59 is going to grow. We're going to have parcels we've got big ones out there now, and we need to make sure that we can take this 123 corridor and shift it over to another highway and tweak it very lightly, and it work for 59 or work for 28 or 130. That's one of the big things we need to do. Don't just make one specifically for 123. Make sure that we can sort of move it over to these other highways that we know are going to become a problem in the near future. I mean, 59 it's wide open. And if we don't do some restriction on curb cuts, I love the fact we have native vegetation. Yeah, one of them things. But we have everything that where it'll still give us the rural look that we want and love in this area without becoming an Easley. We don't want anything in Easley coming to Oconee County. I mean, the roads, the signs, we want to keep that out here, so we need to try to control that now before it even starts on some of these highways that we have that we know are coming up to be a busy area. So and then I try to listen to the council on what every once in a while they'll throw a little tidbit out there for us to listen to, and you got to catch them when you can, because half the time they won't repeat them. So it's just the traffic thing is right now, from what I understand, is one of their bigger points, is try to make the traffic not less, but make it a lot safer for the people that's out there. Because if it stays the way it's going, people are going to start going down 24, hitting 85, bypassing Clemson altogether because they don't want to get into that traffic. And that only hurts us, and it hurts Clemson. So we don't want to do either one.
Going along with the safety aspect on 123 is, I'd like to see us be able to maybe work with the CAT bus in Seneca about coming up with designated stops.
Yeah.
They stop wherever now, and they already have caused accidents. It's one more thing is the more growth we have, we're going to have more stops. So we have designated bus stops.
So we realize we're already behind the 8 ball on 123, but in an attempt to address it, while we're not the experts at saying here's where an entry point should be or this or that, and we realize that topography is already an issue, we realize that sectioning off of parcels is already an issue, but based on y'all's experience in other areas, are there a few things that maybe you can present to us as policy, whether it's saying if you've got X amount of road frontage and you're putting a new commercial structure in place, that you need to allow for the right to the next business to also connect into your driveway as you're turning in and out, something that connects to create a secondary road or off-road just based on a policy of leave that curb open, kind of what you're seeing in some of the other cities that may not be finished out. present maybe to us a few things that, here's the amount of commercial that's still available, here's the small parcels, based on topography, we could create some element that says, leave this section open so that when the next guy comes in, he's gonna tap into where you are. Some of those kind of things, without some inordinate study, as we've said, that may address safety on a partial issue at least.
One thing I'd like to throw in here is, we all recognize that 123, there's just not a whole lot we can do at this point between Clemson and Seneca. But what we can do is address reliever roads, stuff like improve shallow road to get on across the lake to Clemson. Just have, I mean, we're not going to be able to put 4 or 5 more lanes on 123. The land isn't there to do it. We'll have to have parallel reliever roads. Now, this is looking long-term, but,
Is Shiloh Road the one that goes up, if you take a left there at the light at Food Line and scoot up? Because I know there's a back way to get all the way to Seneca from Clemson that we used to take to get around ball games when I worked at Clemson. And you would, and that, if that road was improved and it was clearly designated as an alternate route, or however you would phrase that in it, those are things that you can also do, is improve alternate routes to those main routes, particularly for the local people that are going from home to town.
Is it Silo or Shiloh?
shallow.
You said Shiloh, is that Shiloh Road? Is that what that is?
Yes. Give you some items to work with on there. Anybody else have anything else? Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to number 7, the proposed amendment change regarding moving setback requirements for the control-free district from chapter 38 to 32. We have staff comments.
I do, Mr. Chairman. And I drafted this, going off just straight out of the motion, so it's not too fancy or, I don't think, ambiguous. The motion was simply to move the setback requirements from chapter 38 to 32. Bulk setback requirements, and this is based in large part off of comments and questions to Mr. Markovich and responses that he had. And I believe that the driving force, or at least one of the primary ones, was to enable the county to have some clear direction to developers, builders for multifamily housing, where you have like a townhouse or a condominium where you have shared walls with individual lots within a multifamily dwelling structure. So that I understood to be one of, if not the primary driving force, but in any event, I made the change. You'll notice at first, is this something you're able to put up on the board? So one thing that has kind of troubled me since I got here was the lot size minimum 0.57 acres. And I believe when you read this in context, it relates to development and lots with septic tanks. But it does give a minimum lot size that runs contrary to minimum lot sizes that we have. If you're going to apply this plain wording that we have in district or different zoning districts. So talk about it, I just struck through that because the septic permitting issue is something that DHEC handles, the parameters of where they're going to allow regular septic tank versus engineered septic tank, and what they're going to allow around it. The setback areas, buffer areas, are things that DHEC very vigilantly looks over. So I struck that section we can talk about, and that's my basis reasoning for doing it, because I wanted to get rid of that ambiguity. After striking that, you see the first strike through on building lines. That C section 38-10.2 was a sentence that was added in 2015 when we moved the setback language from chapter 32 to chapter 38. And then in 2016, we made the amendment when I was here to make the scalable setbacks in the control-free district. So if you had a smaller lot size, you could have smaller setbacks. So that was an issue with some of those smaller lots that couldn't build on them. So we responded to that. And it's, see right here, the chart that was is still in the control-free district is captured right below. So in any event, the language that you see after that strike through in building lines is the language that was there in 2008 ordinance. I just grabbed the old ordinance and put it right back in. So consistent with the motion, that's the setback language. My concern with that, or thoughts about it, I guess are number one, it's on its face is more restrictive for setbacks than what you have in the control-free district as it is now, which begs the next question is, as Mr. Smith pointed out, where exactly is this intended to apply? And as I've always understood it, most folks would think this is going to apply to subdivision development. Subdivision is the term that's, we have a common thought about what a subdivision is. Subdivision in a planning standpoint can be just one lot, split into two, and one of those lots being very small. And then it also applies to development. All of chapter 32 does in development essentially is any kind of construction. So if you read chapter 32, just on its face reading, not implying anything to it, these setbacks are going to apply to any kind of subdivision and any kind of development. An argument can be made there. So if we put these setbacks back in, you haven't really done anything for that multifamily housing question, and perhaps you've made things more difficult. That all makes sense so far? So with that in mind, I went ahead and grabbed put the or language in here, or you could just go ahead and move the setback language that you have as to the control-free district over here. And I would add, it says setback requirements applicable, there should be a 2, development in the control-free district of the county shall be as follows, and I just moved that table over. Again, that's just following on the motion. I don't think that accomplishes anything except for shifting the setback section from 38 back over to 32 without any real effect, except for perhaps creating some more confusion for folks who are trying to harmonize 32 and 38. So, still with that in mind, leaving that there, the next, thank you, the next language I did try to add to address that, I don't think it's perhaps the most all-encompassing language, but the sentence I added was, setback requirements do not apply to property lines separating individually owned dwelling units situated in a multifamily housing structure, for example, condominiums and townhouses. Might tweak that language a little bit, way y'all want to go. At least I thought of that as a springboard into the conversation of how are we going to deal with the condos and townhouses to make it clear that these can be done without variance within the county. So that's why I put that language in there, because I didn't know that just moving the setbacks from 38 to 32 clearly accomplished it. I think an argument could be made, these are subdivisions going forward, but an argument could also be made that 32 applies to everything, because it's development and subdivisions within this jurisdictional plane. So that's where I drafted it. That's all my kind of disclaimer, preamble for any questions y'all may have. I guess the big question is, what is the ultimate goal? You want to get rid of setbacks in the control-free district, period, just to make multifamily units easier to build, so you individually own units, townhouses, condos, or is there another goal? We can draft to meet that goal.
I like the sentence that you have there for the setback requirements do not apply onto that. So with that, you could still have your setbacks because they're not together, correct?
As far as the multifamily housing, like I said, there's reason why I felt like this wasn't perhaps, it's not a bad sentence, in and of itself, but with, a lot of times you'll see multifamily residential districts as a different zoning district because there are things like density and open space and things like this that you may want to consider when you have multifamily. So this covers that setback issue, that sentence does, but it doesn't necessarily cover some of the other things you might want to consider, such as how much, how much density do you want to allow per acre? Allow a certain amount, percentage of open space, things like this that are often covered in a multifamily residential district, we don't have.
Do we need to come up with a whole section here, on what we are requiring for multifamily, for the condominium townhouses, how much we want, how big? Do we need to come up with a whole section for that, to where it defines everything they need to do to build condos and townhouses?
Well, I guess by that, you're not talking about the construction standards and all of that, you're just talking about the land use aspect of it, which is the density issues perhaps, and setback issues and open space issues. You don't have to. I think you could, one thing that was tossed out early on was, you can get rid of the setbacks in the control-free district, which makes it, I'm not saying Wild West, but it makes it open to do as a developer see fit, and that would solve that problem. If you wanted to add some more control to it, you could use, still have setback requirements plus the sentence that I added. If you want to have some more control yet, then I think you create a district or more in-depth language as if someone's going to do multifamily residential development, this is what you're looking for. And by that, I mean you're going to put in paragraphs for density, open space, and there may be other things that these guys are simply more familiar with than I am. But what I'm familiar with seeing at least is more than this sentence, and it's more akin to having, all right, if you want to build this way, this is what we're looking for.
I got a question. All right, if right now, the current wording is in 38, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
For control-free district setbacks.
For control-free district setbacks. Where are all the rest of the setbacks?
38.
They're in 38, okay. If we put this back in 32, then does this sentence that says setback requirements do not apply to property lines separating individually owned dwelling units, does that then apply to all subdivisions in every district?
Yeah, I would say it would.
It would. If we move it back to 32, then it takes the multifamily restriction out of control-free. You can put a multifamily development in any division,
In concept,
in any
if you
district.
have, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You have density restrictions in these other ones that you don't have in control-free. So the density restrictions in the other districts, I think, would, for the most part, prohibit that kind of development. A lot of them are, I don't have them all memorized, but a lot of them are certainly less dense than most folks would want for a multi, unless it's a duplex or something.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. Does this take into account the cottage-style houses, the tiny houses, like they're building down near the pier? With these setbacks, if we still have these setbacks in control-free, are they going to be able to put those houses really close together, those little houses, or are we still not accomplishing that?
Now, for the tiny houses and for setbacks, well, I guess for those, you're not going to accomplish anything in relation to tiny houses with individual lot lines with the language that we've moved here.
The only way to accomplish that is to do away with the setbacks in control-free.
That's one way, you'll hop in at any time, because these guys are planners. There are other ways, that's one way to do it. There are other ways that it has been done, and it's just a matter of adding some specificity to the type of development that's being sought, and then just writing it out in the ordinance. Have a specific
I think David Stroop kind of referred to this, and that is that, the other options are things that you see fairly commonly with group development kind of arrangements. Or let's say group development could be zero lot line, patio homes, apartments could be considered group development. Condominiums can be considered group development. It's all a question of how you structure it in the ordinance. And as he said, you could have specific criteria within a section like that that would address all the issues associated with, setbacks, density, whether you want common space, access, parking, those kinds of things, if you wanted to go to that level. But what it would do is clarify what we mean by essentially group development, and you could probably, the tiny houses could probably be taken into that same format because you're getting that high density that you want.
Can you help
So-
that by simply defining it, going into your definitions part of the ordinance and saying multifamily housing includes all of those things?
You could certainly put a definition of those things in if it's not
So that
already
it
there.
opens it up?
I'm still getting up to speed on the code, so I'm not sure what definitions are there, but you can certainly define all that, and you can certainly put it under a category if you want. I mean, it's strictly how you want to structure it, but then once you've got the definitions, then the other things
Everywhere you
could
put
flow
it.
from that.
Right.
Yeah. But just
But
options to think about.
Taking out the setbacks and control-free to allow, just say for tiny homes, that means they can build closer to the property lines. And everybody's concerned about everybody's land rights. I bought it, it's mine. That would, it could cause dispute between neighbors when they build, this guy's over here, he's got his one home, nice, and then this guy next to him builds 37 little tiny homes right up against the property line within whatever building codes allow, because we still have setbacks. Building codes says you can't build on your property line, so, you got little areas and it's gonna interfere with your neighbors. I think these setbacks need to stay where they are. We need the word to put something in there that says, you can do this, you can do this. This particular thing doesn't apply to you. We need to word it where my granddaughter sitting in the back there can pick this thing up and go, wow, Grandpa, you can build this right here, it says so. Instead of trying to take out protection, God, I never thought I'd use that word. Take out protecting your neighbor from you building right on the line, and when you go cut the grass, you blow grass on his condo. We need to leave these things in here. They're pretty well, 10 foot. You're not gonna build up 10 foot from your property line anyway, because the state probably, if you got a road, state probably has got a right of way there 20 foot. So leave the things where, move them if they need to be moved into 32, that's fine. If they need to stay where they're at, where all the rest of the setbacks are, leave them there. We just need to word this thing to where it defines out that you can build condominiums. This don't apply to you. You can build townhouses. The setbacks or whatever, to where you can have the same wall right on the property line, or whatever it is. We need to word the thing out for that and leave. We need to quit moving things around in this ordinance. This zoning ordinance is so screwed up right now. We need to quit moving stuff around. Leave it where it's at if that's what the staff recommends. But get something in this ordinance that allows us to build multifamily housing. Build the small houses, the little small things. I like them, they're cute. But don't interfere with your neighbor when you're building right close to the property line, and he's over here got a Saint Bernard dog that was fine up until they built right there on the property line. You're gonna start interfering with everybody else just to satisfy one little group of people, and we need to stop doing that. We need, the multifamily homes, let's write something up that says you can do it, but these are the rules you gotta have. Tom comes into the office down there and he gets it up and he goes, oh, I gotta do this, I'm fine. And he does it and there's no problems. We don't have to keep moving stuff around and mess this zoning ordinance up any more than it already is. My thoughts.
Yeah, and just from a historical perspective, because I think I've been on here longer than anybody else, which is nice to say, because it used to be Mr. Honey. historically, those setbacks were put into that because it was the single greatest problem being brought to the development group as far as, well, I wanted to put it here, but it turned out there's some kind of runoff thing or a pipe or something else that related to something in the neighbor's property. And so they were asking for they were wanting to build it and didn't understand why they couldn't. And so the simple thing was simply put setbacks in and it would back them off just enough to get out of people's way, but make sure that we leave that sentence in there, and if a definition will help that sentence apply more broadly to all kinds of multifamily developments, whether they're tiny homes with a common area and parking in a different spot, whatever it is, make sure that we define it broadly enough that all of those things, not just apartments or condominiums, but all the modern things that people are doing to make houses affordable. Me personally, I know that we had worked very hard to get all the setbacks together because it was easy for somebody to simply look at it and say, okay, here's the setbacks. I'm in this, these are my setbacks. I know what they are. Rather than to go to another section or to look at where the setbacks are and go, oh, I don't have any. Okay, that's great. I don't have to worry about it. Whereas then they come up, they've got some ideas and they've got some plans in mind, maybe they've even done some drawings, and they come up here and find out, oh, I was looking in the wrong place, darn. And that's not good. So for me, staff's recommendation was to put them in 38 because that's where all the rest of them were. It made sense to have them in 38. So my personal preference would be leave it where the rest of them are so it's easy to find. But make sure it's clear we can do multifamily housing.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. So setbacks are in codes. Like if somebody goes to pull a permit, they tell them where they can build and where they cannot build.
They don't tell them where they can and can't build, but there is restrictions on where you can build. You've got to you can't build, your property line can't be 2 foot away with the drip lines and all this other stuff.
Is this repetitive?
Nope.
Us putting these in here, is it contradicting codes? Is it repeating codes? Or is it something totally different? Is my question.
Mr. Markovich.
Building codes have no bearing on the setback whatsoever. What comes into play in some occasions is the class of building that you're building, in other words, the type of walls. If you build Class A walls, a 2-hour separation, you can build buildings right up beside each other. If you want to take a single-family residence and build right up to that property line within reason, you would have to build a 2-hour separation wall there and everything that was enclosed and part of that. That's the only way the building codes gets involved in this at all. So, and then also from the idea in terms of setbacks, I mean, regardless of it, let's just assume that you did not have a setback in a particular area. You still have to be able to maintain that residence. You still have to be able to maintain those walls. You still have to have the ability. And the other thing to think about is this, regardless, and this is why the suggestion was to put the setbacks back in 32, is because you're still going to have utility right-of-ways that are going to be required. Utilities are not just going to go and just apply them to the front of the house, and they're going to have to be able to service these right-of-ways. And so there's things like that regardless of what the setbacks are, I mean, utility companies are going to have a say in this thing. The other thing is like on our front setbacks, nobody could ever build right up to a street because you'd never be able to make your utility connections. You could never make, all these kinds of things that are just every day in the building business wouldn't be able to happen. So there's always going to be setbacks, and whether they're self-imposed or whether they're, set by code, or not code, but regulation.
And I guess that's how we reached this, was there were, people would look at their property, they would think they were control-free, which meant control-free, and they would get an image in their head of what they wanted to do. And then they would come up and start looking at the facts and the details, and they would be angry at the community development staff and others, I'm sure, but probably everybody, if, at some point, if they had a really visual picture of what they wanted to do, and something just wasn't working. And that's why we put these setbacks in, that it kind of made people realize that it's not really control-free. There are things that you've got to plan for and think about when you're looking at your lot. You know, make sure that if your lot is this big, don't be looking at the Southern Living plans that are this big, because it might interfere with your ability to build on your place. And that's, you know, we worked at getting them as minimal as possible, we thought, within reason. And I could care less really which book they were in, but I know my best friend's husband just passed away, and she's going to put a farm up for sale. And she was asking me questions and where to look for things. And I said, well, you know, right now it's here, but we might be going to put it back over here. And she said, well, why don't you just put it where you're going to, where they all are, so I know. And I'm like, well, that would make sense, but that's not always how we do things. So for me, having them all together made sense. But again, you know, that's just me.
I think ultimately we need to look to the experts to say, where does it go? Based on us giving a generalized parameter of this is what we're hoping to accomplish. Now, how do we accomplish it? Becomes y'all's feat, I think.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I think probably the best way to tackle it would just be to have for y'all to vote on at next meeting, essentially, let me say, probably 4 options. One would be to move them to Chapter 32 as it is now with one of these 2 groups of languages, you know, be it the old, when it was on the board, the old setback language, or essentially the scalable setback language for control-free. And as a subset of that, for clarity in Chapter 32, vote on whether you want me to change that language, and I'll come up with some new language to make it clear that this is only going to apply to, say, major subdivisions, being a subdivision that's 10 lots or more, a new subdivision, which I think is where it's going. You don't necessarily want this to, if you're just going to switch chapters, you don't want to have the same effect, right? You want it to apply to new building in a new subdivision. Okay, so that would be one option. The second option would be, let's just keep it where it is and just vote to remove the setbacks in the control-free district. And then a third option would be to keep it where it is and us bring you some language that's a little bit more fulsome than what I have here about multifamily residential development. So we have language on that cover patio homes, tiny homes, condos, townhouses, and we could pull that together from perhaps some other good jurisdictions that we know, and we can come up with that language so you'd have some options. You have some options now, but I don't know without that language on the multifamily residential, either be a district or just language to show someone who wants to develop that way, this is how we're going to provide that avenue. I don't know you can make an informed decision. And I wish I had that for you now. Didn't anticipate necessarily we'd go that way and didn't have perhaps the time to do it either. Get it straight, but I think we can get that for you.
I think that'll be suitable.
Mr. Chairman, can I say one other thing? On here about the .57 acres, I don't know that .57 acres needs to be in there, but I would like to mention to staff something that I do see on a weekly basis. And the question that the consumer or the person out in the marketplace asks is, how did the county allow this to happen? And I don't know that it's the county's responsibility, but on a weekly basis, I see where somebody has purchased a lot from a developer who had developed a subdivision, and what they find out, once they meet their setbacks, they can't build a house of the minimum square footage required of that development. Whether the angle or the setback or whatever, now all of a sudden they're either building a house that's only 10 foot wide by 80 feet or 80 feet wide by 10 foot deep, which nobody's going to do, and all of a sudden the lot that they paid $100,000 for is now worth nothing. And their question to me is how did the county allow that subdivision to be approved? And I can tell you lot after lot after lot after lot that people have purchased that those situations occur where they can't build the house on it that meets the setbacks. So I don't know that we need something that says 0.57 acres, but, and I don't know that it's the county's responsibility. Maybe it's simply a buyer beware in those situations, but it is an observation that I do see on a regular basis.
But with that, that would be to add some minimum lot sizes going forward for control-free as an option.
And I don't know that it needs to be a minimum lot size, or if it's something that puts the onus back on the developer to make sure that whatever their lot sizes are, that they do at least have a footprint that matches their minimum build sizes or something in there. And it may be, again, it's nobody's responsibility, but I do see people, consumers out there that have purchased things that aren't capable of doing what they had purchased, and now they're holding something that has no value to it. And they look as to who was responsible for allowing this to happen. And right now it goes back to them, which is not a real good answer sometimes. So just be aware of it as you're marking through a negative number there, or a number on acreage.
Anything else from anyone? Okay, you don't need a motion or anything on that, do you? Okay, great, thank you. We'll go to number 8, proposed amendment change to remove small area rezoning requirements. Mr. Root, are you gonna take that up again?
I am. Shift over to it. Really what I did was, it was pretty simple. It wasn't, the motion necessarily wasn't to remove the small area rezoning method, but was to remove the 200-acre target to make it easier to zone as a parcel versus having to get a conglomerate together. So it'd be similar to a rezoning. So if you're in if you're in a residential district and you want to move to whatever, AG, I'm not saying that would happen, just the first thing that comes to mind. You can do that as an individual parcel, whereas if you're in control-free district or initial, whatever you want to call it, zoning district, placeholder district, non-zone zone district, whatever you want to call it, that you couldn't, as an individual parcel, move into one of the other ones. You'd have to go through one of these 3 methods at the beginning. So all I did was struck through that whole bit of language about the 200 acres and moved the rezoning language that's in the back into the small area zone. So the end result is that at this point, if this were to be adopted by y'all and sent to council and they approved it, if someone wanted to move, as long as it's consistent with the comprehensive plan, wanted to move out of control-free individually, they could rezone into a new district. There's language in there, to Mr. Codner's point, that you could do it collectively. That's not to say that you would get, 200 acres, but if a group of folks wanted to do it on one petition to county council, they could. That's the sentence that's added in there. I think that meets the motion. I think the intent was to make it easier and make it consistent, moving from CFD, like folks can move out of other districts. So that's what you have as to the wisdom of it and all of that. I agree it could end up with a flood of rezoning requests, but I don't see that in just my juxtaposing this area versus low country or Midlands or someplace like that where zoning is a little bit more rabid. I don't see it happening so much up here, but who knows what's going to look like in 10 policy on it. Could open up floodgates.
Comments?
I would want to always defer to staff to do the judgment based on what their expertise is, and I sure don't want to open a can of worms.
Okay, I'll start it. To me, the 200 acres is awful big, when to be in any other district, the acreage is so much smaller, 5 acres, 10 acres, whatever, to be a certain classification. I'm like Mr. Root, I don't think we're gonna have a big rush of people wanting to be zoned anything,
Other than control free.
other than control-free what they are now. 'Cause it's hard, just take I got 3 acres. If I wanted, which I don't, but if I wanted to be zoned something else, I don't have, my neighbors around me all want to be control-free, so I'm stuck with control-free. I have no protection, again, I hate that word, to protect me from anything else. So I'm stuck with what I have. And I don't know if taking it completely out is the answer. We may need to put in a 10-acre limit or a 5-acre limit or something. But it gives the smaller landowners in the county the opportunity to be zoned something else if they so choose, without having to drag their neighbors into it, or bother their neighbors for that matter, that don't even want to talk about zoning. It gives them an opportunity to be rezoned. The 200 gives them no opportunity. I mean, if all of my neighbors never want to be rezoned, then I'm forever stuck with what I have, because I only have 3 acres. So with this, it would give me and all the rest of us the opportunity, if we wanted to be zoned residential or whatever, as long as it fell with the land use map and the comprehensive plan, they could do that. But with the 200 acres, we have no choice but to stay what we are now, or go out and try to bug our neighbors into signing something they really don't know and don't want, and it'll be another Jennings McMahon deal. And I don't want that. But this is, we may need to set a certain acreage. We may need to do a 5 acres. You have to have at least 5 acres to move out. Or multiple families, if you got 3 or 4 people there in the area and y'all combine 5, 6 acres, and y'all can come up and make one petition. But it should be a lot smaller than 200 acres, a lot smaller.
Isn't there a sentence somewhere in there that says that either the BZA or the county commission can place zoning of any sort on any size?
The county can.
The county can.
County council can.
They can top-down zone you whatever they want.
So would it be a matter of, if you did only have 3 acres and you did want to be some other way, then your only relief, or your relief, would be to go to county council and ask them that?
To come to council and request it.
If you're in control free.
But any other district, if you're in agriculture, you don't have to do that. You can just, I don't know what the minimum is in agriculture.
There is no minimum.
Well, I mean, say if I want to come out of agriculture and go to residential, if there's a certain
There's no
acreage,
minimum.
is there
No
not?
minimum to move from zone to zone.
So,
What's your zone?
so why
So
can't
one you're going to BZA and one you're going to county council for?
Well, one, according to what they're telling me, there's no requirements in any other.
You wouldn't.
What's
go-
that?
The whole thing goes to council. They're the only ones.
Yeah, I mean, they have to approve it regardless, but to go from agricultural to residential, you just fill out a petition. If you've got 5 acres and you want to go, you're in agriculture, you want to go to residential, you just fill out a petition or application, present it, let them look over it, and it's presented to council, they vote on it, and they either say yay or nay. But you can't do that in control free. You have to have 200 acres to get out of control free. If you want it, you have to have 200 acres, fill out the thing, then present that to council. Or, if you're an individual, you can go to council and say, I want this done, and they can do it on their own, but you don't have to go through all that crap when you're doing it the other way. It all should be, going back to being fair, all of them being somewhat fair, and zoning is never fair, but anyway, let them all be pretty much the same. If I don't have to have 200 acres to go from residential to agriculture or residential to traditional rule, then I shouldn't have to have it to get out of control free. Because I didn't ask for control free to start with. That was the county's job. They zoned us control free right off the bat to start zoning. So why should I have to have 200 acres to get out of it, if I choose to?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I think, Bill's gonna speak some more, because he has got some good professional experience on what we have. Is that the problem is the control-free district, and it's really, like I said, it's an unzoned zone district, kind of a placeholder to move out of, and so it's very different than a lot of places have, where you, after you have your initial laid down your zoning areas, folks are able to zone parcel by parcel, like we do our rezoning. In any event, so Bill's gonna speak to that. I just wanna make sure procedurally, so we're in a fair basis. Mr. Markovich has, over time, added a lot of historical institutional knowledge that we don't have, and has been very helpful. But just to make sure you, if you're gonna open that up to allow whoever else may wanna speak to also speak.
I think most of the points have been covered. It's as David said, that in many jurisdictions, and everybody's different within the context of what the state statutes would permit or any other states. But often you'll see areas zoned when zoning first is initiated, and you will see in a zoning complete and what I would call an actual zoning district or categories applied to districts that are, a little bit here, a little bit there. Greenville County did a little bit of that years ago. I guess they continue to do it. They went in and zoned area by area throughout the county, and they did it by the process of meeting with constituents, meeting with citizens, going into the districts, defining what the district was going to be that would be zoned, determining what categories would be appropriate based on existing character of the area, possible growth patterns that would be coming up in the future, and they use those methods, that methodology, to determine what those areas should be zoned. And of course, they had to have a certain percentage of property owners to support those petitions, as you do in the 200-acre thing here. But then they would establish what I would call a true zoning district, or true zoning districts. From there on, it's open-ended. And at that point, any individual property owner or someone who's got control of that property, in addition to council, could make a request to rezone their property if they own 1 acre or 1,000 acres. It would make any difference. They could always make that request, but it's behind all that is a comprehensive plan that says we've established, based on the process we went through, what council and commission and council perceive as the future growth patterns of this area, where we see things going, where we would like to see our development taking place in different categories. And based on that comprehensive plan, that's where they lay down the zoning districts. And then based on that, when you make a request to rezone, it's not an automatic thing. It's not like you go to council and say, I'd like to request my 1 acre be zoned to allow a massive, high-density sort of use next to a residential subdivision. You could do that, but that doesn't mean the commission, the council have to approve it, because they would be looking at what the comprehensive plan had proposed, what citizens are concerned about, potential impacts in the area, all those kinds of things. So right now, with control-free, you don't really have a fully formed zoning pattern there. It's more like a holding pattern that you're in with the control-free district. Everybody does it differently, as I said, but that's kind of the pattern in Greenville County, for example, was to do it district by district and use a more comprehensive approach. Problem with that is it takes a lot of time and a lot of support and effort from the community. And if that's not there, it would, it just wouldn't matter. But it is different between, control-free is a different animal in my sense of the thing than a traditional zoning category where you're already in R20 or whatever, residential 20,000 square foot lots or something, and you want to go to higher density and you request a multifamily category for your property. Absolutely, no problem. Sure, do that. But without the 200-acre thing, the only problem I see with that is you don't really have a clear and consistent picture of what you want these areas to become, or what these folks see these areas becoming. So anybody can just come in and ask anything at any time, and whether or not that would become a problem or logistically a problem, I don't know, but would it create a situation where you had a lot of incompatible uses and incompatible stuff in the future? I don't know. That's something you'd have to, and council would have to decide.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think with the control-free, a lot of people in this county didn't want zoning, period, to begin with, and that was, to me, seems like maybe a way to get zoning into the places that wanted it and to not enforce it so strictly on those of us out there that didn't want it. So I like the 200 acres because I don't have to worry about spot zoning all the way around me. If my whole area is not in agreement on what we should do as far as, moving to another zone, then we shouldn't be forced into another zone. Just because my neighbor wants something, the neighbors all the way around him may not want that. Let him do what he wants with his property. He's in uncontrolled. He can still do what he wants with it. But he's not going to cause that effect to spread to his neighbors, is the way we kind of look at it out where I'm at.
Well, he's certainly gonna impact what happens around on your property if he picks something, It may not be given a name, but it is going to impact it. So, and I have mixed feelings about the 200 acres. I certainly understand why it was done. But I also understand somebody's right to, pick what they want to be in. So, again, I can only comment, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If the whole county lived by that, it would be certainly a wonderful, nice thing. If we knew that councils would continue to refer always to the land use map that has been approved and our comprehensive plan and make decisions based on that rather than the demand for continuous growth or the demand for continuous sprawl or the demand for continuous numbers of people in the county, in order to build our money base, I would say that there would be no reason, to have to worry about all of this. But the fact that the rezonings have to be approved based on councils and the commission's thing, I think helps a lot. But again, we don't know what council will do in the future, so I don't know. This is where the wisdom of staff comes in, again, because they're trained in this, for me.
We have in our backup material average, it's been averaged out, agricultural district, the average lot sizes are 32 plus acres. That's when you average it all out, what we have. And the average on control free was 5.8 acres, is the average, what the average owner has. Instead of having 200 acres, why can't we cut it down to a smaller size? Not do away with it altogether, but just cut it down to a smaller size where more people would have the opportunity to move out of control free if they so choose, rather than somebody else trying to drag them into one that they do not want. Maybe we make it, 25 acres. That still hurts the little guy that only owns 2 or 3 acres, but he could get maybe enough to do 25 acre lot or to ask a request to be rezoned. That seems like a more realistic thing than having 200 acres because, the most people I know that only own a couple of acres, there's no way they could get enough people to agree to zoning for one, much less get 200 acres of it. And this would give those type of people a little more opportunity to be rezoned if they so choose. Any, from,
It makes common sense to do it that way. If you want to keep the 200, keep some of the benefits of the 200 acre small area rezoning ordinance section that we have in place, but make it still a little bit easier. There are some other things that, since I've been here, have been pointed out as potential defects with the way it's written, is people getting dragged in to a zoning petition. So that would be something you'd want to consider if it would just be, it'd have to be petition signed by all landowners, as opposed to a percentage. And then it must be 25 acres, whatever y'all land on. And then another one was, if it created a donut hole or something like that, then you could bring in those folks within the donut hole, again, involuntarily. That was something that's been brought up and frowned upon. I don't know, you may want to strike that from it too. So we could clean up, if that's where you want to go, we could clean up some of the language that's perhaps caused some problems historically, and there's only been a couple that I've seen, but I know that those are issues that were brought up. And then just reduce the acreage amount. You certainly could do it that way.
I'd agree with that.
Mr. Chairman, this one, struggling, it seems like, we've done some things here in the past where, we voted and for whatever reason, it's kind of come back to bite us a little bit. It seems like this 200 acres, number one, control-free, whoever came up with that phrase, whatever. But the 200 acres seems like that was just pulled out of the air. I don't think it should be taken down to zero, because that could just create chaos, so to speak. I don't think it will, but it could. But I think with only having staff here for a couple weeks, I just think we need to think about this a little bit longer. Everybody do a little bit of homework, and you all come back with some recommendations, just like you were coming up with some better phrasing, some better language. It just seems like it comes down to language. When you start you start reading some of this stuff, and you have to go to law school to read some of this stuff, and it doesn't make sense. But I'm struck. Costco and the big developers, they buy property, they know what they're getting into. But then we also need to look out for the little guy. And the little guy doesn't have 200 acres. The little guy doesn't have attorneys to come up and fight and petition. I understand both sides of the argument. It seems like I think everybody on this panel here is a little bit in conflict on what decision to make. And I don't think we're prepared to make it tonight. I know I'm not. But I do think, 200 acres is a lot. There's probably a compromise in there somewhere, plus some better wording, and taking some of these dang on percentages out of this thing.
Yeah, we were just sitting here talking. I don't mean to interrupt, but we were just sitting here. Okay, if the average control-free area is 5.8, okay, or the average ag residential is 4.3 or 4.6. Let's say that you could get 5 neighbors adjacent to you, or 10 neighbors adjacent to you, to sign a petition, as long as that wording, I think the key wording in what you added to the small area rezoning is that all persons owning a legal interest in the subject parcels must sign the petition for rezoning. Then that puts you somewhere in the 20, 25 acres to 50 acre minimum. So I'm just throwing that figure out there because, I think that anybody could come up with 5 neighbors that they get along with, that have common values, that have the same interests. Perhaps, maybe not. I don't live in a subdivision, thank goodness, but I think that would be possible. And then that would give you a much smaller minimum request while still protecting that person from being sucked in who didn't want in. I'm just throwing that out there. I agree, Brad, 100%. I don't think we're ready to make this decision. I think the most important sentence is that I think it's very important for people to be able to get out if they want out. I can't imagine anybody that in Oconee County wanting out of control free, but you know, except for those of us that recognize it is a way to protect in a better way, in the best wording, your area. But that thing about having everybody's signature is important. So, let's throw that out, let's everybody think about it, and maybe come back next time with an answer.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. If one person moves out into residential or whatever, his property, everybody around him is control-free. I don't understand how he's getting any more protection. I don't see how that's protecting him when everybody around him is still control-free. How is he gaining protection? I can see it if it's multiple properties, and then that person sells or something. But I don't see how, if you're spot zoning one parcel at a time and the people around them are not in the same zone as they are, I don't understand how they're gaining any protection.
So here's one real-world example that I have seen in a situation like that, especially as it relates to agriculture. I have seen in another state where, say in our case here even, somebody wants to be agriculture as a protection mechanism, or say they have property that's 110 acres. And right now, their way to keep that property 110 acres is they could put it in a conservancy, which nobody really sees except them. They could write it on their deed, which while being public knowledge, isn't necessarily available to people that look around at some of the venues like through our county websites to say, well, what is that zoned? And so this is where I've seen an example happen. You have a farmer who's farming. The next door neighbor, who was a farm, sells to a subdivision, and all of a sudden now there's 200 property owners next to this farm. And the sample I've seen is this was a cattle farm, actually a dairy. This was now 200 voters next door. And every time the wind blew across, those 200 voters started complaining about the cattle farmer. Now, while there were state regulations that protected that farmer, as far as farming is concerned, county council started coming in there and going, oh, well, you can, if the wind's blowing this way, you can't fertilize your apple trees. Or if the wind is doing this, you have to provide these certain things, and all of a sudden put those farmers out of business. One thing from a real estate perspective, if I'm a realtor and I see that I'm about to sell a house, I can go and look on zoning maps and say, hey, these next 1,000 acres are zoned agriculture. Understand that when you buy in here, that they are zoned agriculture as a protection mechanism. So there's a public venue that it's available where somebody didn't have to go research a deed or research a conservancy that says, you're buying into a development, and I don't care if all 200 of you get together, you can't shut the farmer next door down. And I've seen farms get shut down because they weren't zoned. And so agriculture offered a protection to them to say, hey, I'm agriculture. I get to stay this way. I don't care what y'all do around me, but you can't make me go away.
But in the state of South Carolina, we are a right to farm state. They cannot shut you down.
They can't shut you down, but county council can sure make a lot of rules to make it hard for you.
But they cannot supersede state law.
Doesn't matter. They can still make rules that hey, if the wind's blowing this way, don't spray your apple farm.
And they can do that.
And they can do that. So you can get shut down. You can make it, county council could make it so difficult on a farmer that now he's fighting the powers that be.
And sometimes they can simply enforce the laws that are out there. Whereas, or if there's not complaints, they sort of go, oh, it's okay,
But now if you got 200 people complaining because a development came in next to you, that's the one way that a farmer can protect himself, is to say, I want to be zoned to this because I've just told the world that this is what I do, and I have protection as a result of it.
Even if he's only a 10-acre cattle farm.
Now, the problem is that we have right now is that if he's under 200 acres, he can't necessarily go apply to those. Now, one question that I do have to council as we're talking about these overlay districts and that, do those protections work within overlays? And this is what I mean. There are small creeks and river accesses that just happen to be, those creeks are in the 800 feet above sea level, which now puts them in the lake overlay, even though they can't see Lake Kiowee for 2 miles, 3 miles, they're now in a lake overlay. Do some of those zoning protections help them? Right now, lake overlay is no big deal. It's just talking about density. But what if we started creating more restriction on lake overlay? Oh, you can't farm in lake overlay. Well, heck, this is a farmer that just happens to have part of his property that's touching the 800, now 750 feet off of that. If we put some restriction to, and now I'm just giving an example of lake overlay. What if we now go and do a road overlay on 59, or do an overlay here, and future councils start putting more and more restrictions as to what that overlay means? Are we giving protections to those zonings, or are they depending on what our rules become as to the overlays? So I'd like us to, well, maybe you can answer that.
As best I can, just I understand it's kind of a general question, but it's going to depend how the ordinances are written and what is the stated purpose. Generally, the more specific ordinance is going to trump the more general ordinance, and the more recently enacted one is going to trump the earlier enacted one. It's just kind of general principles of statutory construction. But it can be written differently. If we're going to put in a road overlay or something like that, we can say that this is going to apply to zoning districts differently. It's going to bring in a whole slew of other issues to people who zoned in there, and then a lot of conflict, but that's where it comes in. We have to craft it correctly. The concern is a concern that we just have to address, and it depends on, you know, how you want to address it. Generally, I'm assuming that folks who are going to have a specific zoned area, that they're going to want that to override and overlay that may later come.
And that's kind of where we're going back to. Right now, if you're control-free and you're sitting on 59 and you're running a farm, and that's great, and everybody else is running a farm, and that's great, okay. Now, all of a sudden, we throw an overlay down there that says you've got to do this, 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 this on a road frontage 1,000 feet off either side of the road. Now that farmer's going, well, heck, my kids were talking about doing a little vegetable stand up within that section, and now we can't do it because now we fall under commercial regulations of the building has to be this or has to be that or whatever. Now all of a sudden we can't do our little vegetable stand. Whereas if we maybe had an agricultural overlay, we could do certain things granted to us as a right to be in that overlay. Those are just things that I want us to start thinking about as we're starting to talk about corridors and things like that. Where are our people protected? And does it need to be less than 200 acres to provide those levels of protection as we go through some of those areas?
On the 200 acres, about a month ago, I guess Mr. Markovich addressed us, and am I remembering correctly that we're the only county in the United States that's got an acreage requirement?
Well, at least in South Carolina, I wouldn't say that. For initial rezone.
Now, why are we having any acreage requirement when nobody else does?
We may be the only one who has a control-free district, too.
There's that word again.
What might be the best way to approach it, if this works for you, Mr. Chairman, is for me to work with the language that I struck through, all the red lines, that was the 200-acre provision, to clean it up, to get rid of the defects that I noted, you know, as far as bringing folks in who didn't want to be brought in, making sure it's all owners signed off on it, making the contiguity requirement very clear, and then for these fellows perhaps to do some research and think on it from their base of expertise about different reasons for different sizes. 25 acres is good for this reason based on we have, you know, average acres of control-free district parcels or whatever reasons compared to other jurisdictions. So then we could have cleaner language and then some steps, 25 acres, 50 acres, whatever, and some reasons for those. And then you can vote on that or say keep it the same or go with this.
I agree with you. Let's
Yeah,
go that
that's
route.
a good idea. Mhm. Do you need direction in that? Or
I think with that, just because we've had so much and there's different thoughts,
Okay.
maybe have a motion to direct staff as stated.
Make that motion.
Can you repeat what Mr. Root said, just so we can get a little bit more better on our motions?
Replay the tape.
Yeah, replay the tape, please.
Mr. Pearson, the motion would be to direct the county attorney and planning staff to draft an ordinance with multiple options as to rezoning, stating, clarifying the language under the small area rezoning method, getting rid of defects as stated, and giving different options for minimum acreage. I think that covers it, right?
Exactly.
You can just say, I move as stated by the county attorney.
Motion is stated by county attorney.
We have a second.
Second that motion.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I think last time we had a problem making sure we called for all opposed. So call for that.
Any opposed? None. Proposed amendment to the scenic highway ordinance to establish planning commission as the review authority. Mr. Root?
Chairman, if I may, and I think this is the easy one. This one was, as we, not everybody was here last time, so just a real quick history of it. Council's having difficulty appointing members to the scenic highway committee, which would be the body who received applications from interested entities or persons to designate a highway as a scenic highway, and it gets some protections that are written within this code section that we have here. Couldn't populate that committee, so it was sent to, essentially through me to you all to see if you wanted to revise the ordinance, so it's written that once an application comes in, it's directed by planning staff to an ad hoc committee that y'all create, or just to you all as a planning commission. And the last meeting we had said that y'all could just handle it as a planning commission. We haven't had a lot of these, and so we just essentially eliminate the scenic highway committee, not change the ordinance in any other event, but in any other way, but essentially just remove that, which has been kind of a middleman that we couldn't put in place. So now it would go from the applicant to planning staff, they'd make sure it's ready and to go, and then they'd bring it to y'all, and y'all said do a report on it, make a recommendation, and send it to council. So that's what this ordinance does. It's just been rewritten and cleaned up a little bit.
What kind of items would planning commission be reviewing?
Okay, so.
I'm sorry, I wasn't here last meeting. So.
Oh, no, it's all right. Have you read over any of the scenic highway visions that were in the backup? I don't know which part
No,
you're asking. Okay, so the essence of this, and I'm not gonna say it doesn't do a whole lot, it does some things, is that a entity can apply and say, we want Highway 11 is a bad example because it's already a state highway, but I'm just gonna use it. We want a Highway 11 from point A to point B to be a scenic highway because it has these intrinsic qualities. It's beautiful, it's scenic, we've got a lovely amount of flora out there and wildlife, and people come to the county because of it. We'll pick up all the trash, and our organization will keep Oak County beautiful, whatever. So they fill out that application. The planning staff would receive that, make sure it's a full application consistent with, I think it's Appendix A. All it has to be in the management plan, essentially the application. They would have forwarded that to the committee. The committee says, yeah, we like it or not. They would then forward that to the planning commission. Y'all would say you like it or not, and then forward it to council. If council then approved it, it would have some protections. The main protections are if you're not a property owner abutting onto that scenic highway, you're not going to be allowed to pull up shrubberies. You're not going to be allowed to damage that property. You could later add stuff to it, like the state act does, like Highway 11 or really in Buford, they have a couple scenic highways where they've added things to the ordinance that you're not going to be able to put up billboards or things like that. We don't have that written into ours, but it could be added. But the essence of the protection really is just that you're not going to, at this point, you're not going to mess with the shrubs or the trees or what have you. And the people who designated it to be a scenic highway are obliging themselves to keep it clean. So I'm just going to get a sign up there that says it's a designated highway. So, I mean, it's a pretty simple ordinance. So the only problem we've had is getting somebody to be on that committee.
Yeah. I mean, we're not approving projects or
Y'all's
buildings
job
or?
right now is not to approve any kind of project. All it is to, remove the scenic highway committee and essentially put y'all in that position.
We
You're
would
already
be
in that
getting it
position.
anyway, right?
What's that?
We would be getting it anyway.
You wouldn't be getting it anyway, so it's just removing the middle step.
Middleman is going away.
Yeah, there's no real change in the ultimate outcome. Just when we rolled this past last time, because we had so little interest in the committee and so few applications, to be a scenic highway, we put it in front of council as essentially getting rid of this ordinance altogether, aside from part of 28 that's been adopted, and there's a big hoopla, from the community that said, no, don't do away with that. So council kind of tweaked it. Let's just address the committee issue. So that's all this does.
All right.
So do you need a motion
Just a
to
motion
make that
to
change in the ordinance?
forward the amended scenic highway ordinance to county council.
Motion?
I'll make the motion as worded by county attorney to forward the motion.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? None. Thank you. At this point, is there any old business? None? Any new business?
I've got an item. Mr. McCall asked me to put on the agenda for next time, look at airport improvements. He's been taken to task about our airport by, the guy that owns Baxter. Anyway, we'd like to see 500 more feet of runway. Like to see jet fuel prices more in line with how they are at other airports.
I don't know if that has anything to do with the planning commission.
Well,
For-
if it's
for-
an
for
airport
rights.
commission or something, what's the
Because there's the
procedure
airport
here?
commission.
There is the airport commission, and that one falls in the lines of a lot of different entities. The administrator council, the airport commission, probably nothing that I've heard so far with planning commission. I don't know, Mr. Grammer, if there's other items. Mr. McCall told me about the fellow from Baxter speaking up, but I don't know if there's other issues. I know Mr. Mulder was made aware of it too. That it was a fallout. So I think it's on everybody's radar. If you could just repeat for me what other issues you know of, the runway, gasoline prices.
When he asked about a hangar at Oconee, they somewhat rudely told him that he could put some money down and wait 10 years and maybe one would come up. Now, that's not really how you talk to a fellow that, well,
I may be mistaken, but isn't it already in the plans for future building of hangars?
It is, and that's one of the issues that Mr. Mulder was made aware of, and then Mr. McCall talked to me and Mr.
Yeah.
Mulder, I believe, about it too. I just want to make sure if there's anything that's planning commission oriented, Mr. Gammon heard about that, we do get it on the next agenda.
well, I happened to be present when they were having that discussion, and, well, this is a guy that's got several factories across the country, and we'd like him to keep adding here. He'd like to see improved instrument approach. The one at Clemson is very basic. But there's a number of things, but if it could be looked into, it's something we need to, that's an area we need to grow in Oconee County. Now, if that's not for the planning commission to plan, somebody needs to be working on planning it.
Just so I can make sure I capture all of what you heard of that conversation, if you can just give me a call, if it's appropriate, you can tell me if you think of other things. Sounds like so far everything that you said I've heard, and that's on the radar, we just make sure it's addressed properly.
Yep.
If there's anything that he brings to me that's a planning commission issue, then I'll let it fly.
Sure.
So we just have to talk about that.
Yep.
Anything else? Motion to adjourn? All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you.
What was that? That's cool. That was for mayor. Left by the former occupant of the seat.
Your stack of papers with the red mark.
All right, yes.
Am I wrong in my
See you, Adam.
See ya.
He should be able to get you.
Well, and that's the thing, I mean, I've seen people in a dairy where they started restricting how the 18-wheelers access the road. And now all of a sudden, I've seen them, you know, now you can't, you're carrying too much dust, and now you gotta water the road before they come in, and
Down so much gravel, yeah. Oh, do you? Cool, are you out? Awesome, I'll come get it right now.
and those are areas where zoning can protect the person that's asking for it.
That's what I was, they tell them that this road is farm things will take something. Right, only as you keep your dirt wall.
The biggest deal that I want to do from a real estate perspective is that, yes, there are protections and conservancies. Yes, there are protections for your deed, but nobody sees that. So as a real estate agent, I can go to a public entity like a zoning map and say, look, these 400 acres over here are zoned this way, so if you don't like smelling chickens and you don't like smelling cows, you don't want to deal with the development right here. And that, or just be aware that when you buy into this development, that these are some of the aspects, beautiful mountains, or this or that or whatever. I've just seen too many people where all of a sudden 200 or 300 people are voting in these county councils here against one guy who's trying to fight.
Yeah, that's exactly. Because people are already doing 90 miles an hour down the road we live on and riding right through the
I just don't want to burden somebody I just want somebody, when we start not wanting to land, burden somebody without them having first had the right to protect.
And I think that's awesome. Thank you for thinking of that part.
Yeah, I know, that's why I put that sign up there. That's really the sign, which is under. No, it's it was a model, let's see, the bottom sign is 3 feet. Yeah, we looked at it. There was
Whatever you want to use, whatever you want. So, yeah. You can think on that a little bit, we can talk about it.
Right, that's on there, that's correct.
I understand.
Thank you very much for the time, Warren. What?
Pick an area where there's some not people who say, we'll support, you know, Sure, sure.
Kind of like, what are you trying to accomplish?
Somewhat slowly, I'll get to.
All right, see you, Paul, thank you.
I'll move fast. I'll get you a call.
So the video and everything.